Welcome to Deck Analysis and Testing. Today we have a look at Predaplant. Predaplant is a plant fusion deck that fusion summons using dark monsters. That also includes your opponent's monsters, backed by a super consistent skill and a searchable super poly. This deck has all the tools in the world to break through pretty much any amount of monsters in an end board. It's like a cheaper and more consistent Borrowlink deck that also loses to free set back row. So now let's have a look at what makes this deck so good. We will start with the skill. The skill is the one that you can obtain from Yuri's level 20 reward. It has two main effects. One allows you to reveal two cards in your hand that are Predap cards, or poly spell cards, or fusion spell cards, and then add a regular poly from outside your deck to your hand, and also any Predap card from your deck or graveyard to your hand. This is probably the most ridiculous consistency skill that I've ever seen. It adds two cards, it adds any Predap card, which is insane, and it also adds from the graveyard. What an insane skill. And it's not done yet. We also have a second effect that if your opponent controls a monster and you don't, you can just place a predator counter on a face-up monster your opponent controls. And then it has the usual effect of making any monster with a predator counter lose levels until it becomes a level 1. And this skill doesn't target and it doesn't destroy. So what it does is that it gives your opponent a counter on their monster, and then you can just use the effect of one of your Predaplant monsters to distribute it to summon itself. It's like a kaiju, except it summons to your own field and it's searchable. So yeah, you can probably tell why this deck is so good at breaking boards just by looking at the skill alone. But let's have a look at the cards. We have one copy of Orphis Scorpio. This card is pretty good. It's one of your most important combo starters, but you don't need more copies of this card because it is searchable from your skill and some of your own Predap cards as well. This card, when normal or special summoned, can send a monster from your hand to the graveyard, and then special summon a Predaplant monster from your deck except for itself. The card that you're going to special summon is always going to be this card, Predaplant Darlingtonia Cobra. This card, when special summoned by a Predaplant monster, can add a poly spell card or a fusion spell card from your deck to your hand. This adds super poly, which is ridiculous. It's a searcher for super poly. Next is 3 copies of the level 1 Predaplant. This card is also part of your main turn 1 combo. You have this on your field, and then just use it for the effect of your fusion to tribute it, and then this will search you a Predap card from your deck to your hand when you use the fusion effect you tribute it. And you're going to use this effect to grab one of your spell traps, which are really good. Next is one copy of the other level 1, Predaplant by Bliss, but this card is from the box. It's not as good as the other level 1, but it's still good. It still searches anything when it's sent to the graveyard, and you can also special summon this card for free if you have a Predaplant counter, Predator counter, or rather, on the field. So it's basically a free summon that also searches you stuff as well. Next is a kaiju. We talked about this for a little bit just then. You can basically summon this card from your hand or graveyard as well by just tributing any monster with a predator counter. So what you do with this card is you put a counter on your opponent's monster using your skill, and then just make this guy by just yeeting away one of your opponent's monsters. And finally, for our last 2 monsters, it's gonna be last 2 main deck monsters is going to be this one. I will not attempt to pronounce its name, I'll just call it Clammy. So Clammy has a pretty interesting effect that allows you to always use your opponent's monsters that have a predator counter as dark monsters. So you can use your skill to just put a predator counter on any monster, even if it's not dark, and as long as this card is on the field, it is treated as dark, so you can just fusion summon any of your Predaplant fusions that need dark monsters by using your opponent's monsters that have a predator counter. And this card also has a really strong fusion summon effect that can fusion summon using itself and other things that you have on hand, in hand or field, or you can also use a monster that your opponent has as long as it has a predator counter. So this is another way that you can get rid of your opponent's monsters that have a predator counter, aside from your really strong kaiju. For the spells, we're playing a ton. We're playing a copy of Ultra Polymerization. This is basically a poly that only fuses from field, but you also pay 2,000 life points and also has a graveyard effect that you can banish this card from the graveyard and then special summon back the fusion materials that you used for the fusion summon. And also these two effects are not a shared hard once per turn, so you can use both effects in the same turn, which is really, really strong. We also have one copy of Super Poly. This card needs no introduction. It's searchable, and your opponent can't respond to it. It's ridiculous, really strong. We have two Cosmic Cyclone because, as I said in the intro, this deck has a bit of a problem to face against back row heavy decks because this deck doesn't really have an archetype way to get rid of back row. So the expensive version, we were playing Nightmare Phoenix and Ningirsu to get rid of some back row, but in this free-to-play version, we're just going to play some Cosmic Cyclones that you can get using box chips for free. Next are some Predaplant spells. We have one copy of Predapractice. This card allows you to special summon a Predaplant monster from your hand, and then add any Predap card from your deck to your hand. This card is searchable with your skill, so it is fine with one, but if you have more copies, definitely play as many as you can. This card is really, really good. And we have the Predaplant equip spell. Predapruning is basically a monster reborn that also equips itself to the monster that you special summon back. And finally, we have one copy of Predaplast. This is a quick play spell that you want to search turn 1. And what it does is just put counters on your opponent's monsters. This does screw up some decks that need specific levels because any monsters with a Predaplant counter becomes level 1. So you can just screw up some Synchro or Xyz decks that way. Or if they aren't playing decks like that, you can always just use them as fusion material. And also, once you have Dragostapelia on your field, any monster with a Predaplant counter just have their effects negated. So that's basically a negate as well if you have the fusion monster. And also we were playing 3 copies of Fusion Recovery. This is a really strong extender that allows you to grab back your poly along with any of your Predaplant monsters that you use as fusion material so that you can extend further and make more fusion monsters even if your opponent stops you from making your first fusion monsters. For the extra deck, we're playing 3 copies of Dragostapelia, our main boss monster. This card needs a fusion and a dark monster as material, and can once per turn as a quick effect place a predator counter on your opponent's monster, and any monster with a predator counter becomes level 1 as usual. But also, while this card is on the field, any monster with a predator counter have their effects negated, so basically it's a monster negate. You also have the main combo extender, which is a lower level Predaplant Fusion. This card, when fusion summoned, can add any Predaplant monster or Predap spell trap from your deck or graveyard, or face up extra deck to your hand. It's a really strong card. It's like Kid Colors of Predaplants. And also you can tribute a monster that you control or a monster that your opponent controls that have a Predator counter, and then just special summon any Predator, any Predaplant monster from your deck. And usually you will use this to tribute your level 1 guy to get a free search as well. And also we have one copy of Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. This card isn't really a Predaplant monster, but it is really important in this deck. This card can be fusion summoned using 2 dark monsters on the field, so a really good target for your Super Poly. You can fusion summon using stuff from your field or your opponents as well if you use Super Poly, and this is a really good monster to bring out if your opponent has a bunch of dark monsters. This effect doesn't really matter too much, it's just a big guy that you can use Super Poly on, but it does get a lot of attack if your opponent has a special summoned monster with a lot of attack, and it can gain the same amount of attack that monster has, and then when this card is destroyed, you just blow up the entire field as well. And for our final two fusion monsters, because we are playing a searchable Super Poly, and also because we're not locked into any type of monsters from the extra deck, we are free to play some Super Poly targets that might come up eventually. We're playing one copy of Twin Burst Dragon because Blue Eyes is a light deck, so our dark-based fusion monsters don't really work against him too well. That's why we're playing a fusion monster specifically against Blue Eyes, because it's a pretty popular deck. As well as Cyber Dragons. Cyber Dragons is another one of those decks that are just like light-based, so it's pretty annoying. I mean, you can still place Predator counters on their stuff to fusion summon using that, but it's just pretty funny that these two decks have fusion monsters that are really strong. When we get to fusion summon them using Super Poly, we can basically fusion summon away their entire board just by using a Super Poly on, say, a Cyber Dragon plus a Cyber Dragon Infinity to make one of these guys and then just completely crack their board that way. Okay, we might as well look at the expensive version. Not too much has changed. As I said, this deck is pretty cheap. We're just playing more copies of Scorpio. We don't actually need 3 copies because it's really consistent in this deck. Our skill grabs us anything we need anyway, so 2 is fine. The spell we were playing at 3 copies because it's really good. You can summon anything using this. Not just the Scorpio, you can summon other things such as the Fusion Summon guy, the level 2 that Fusion Summons Clammy, yeah, that guy. And we're playing only 2 copies of Fusion Recovery, and instead we're playing Eclipse instead of the Cosmic Cyclone, because we do have some options in the extra deck to get rid of some of our opponent's back row. As you can see, we're playing one Dryas, one Nightmare Phoenix to pop back row, and Ningirsu. And the reason why we play Dryas is because Ningirsu needs Link monsters for all of its material, so that's why we need a Phoenix plus a Link 1 Dryas to make the Ningirsu as a non-target card removal. It doesn't only remove monsters, it removes spells and traps as well. Doesn't target, really strong card if you can make it. And also we're playing the other Predaplant monster fusion that we can't play in the free-to-play version because it is from another box. We're playing 2 copies of Chimera Flesia. This card is really easy to make. It only needs a Predaplant and a Dark. And also it's a monster removal, so even more removal, as if this deck doesn't already have enough monster removal options. And also when it leaves the field, it gets you a Poly spell card or a Fusion spell card from your deck to your hand in the next standby phase, so that is pretty good follow-up as well. Okay, now let's have a look at the replays. Look at the win streak we've got. That's kind of insane. We started this win streak all the way back in the True Draco video, and it's still going on strong. We're going first, and let's see what we can do. By the way, these games are streamed. We play these games on stream on both Twitch and YouTube. You can go check it out if you would like to see me play this deck in real time. We have the entire combo. It's basically a 1-card combo because any one of the Clammies or Predaplant or the Scorpio is entire combo on its own. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna end on 2 set cards, 1 Predaplant that we searched and a Super Poly that we also searched, and then we're going to be able to make a Dragostapelia during our opponent's turn by using our opponent's monsters as well. And because our opponent is going to attempt to banish our monster, we will instead make a copy of Starving Venom. We don't really need to make Dragostapelia because it's Dark Magicians and their monsters don't have effects that are too annoying anyway. It's like not that much value off of making Dragostapelia, so instead we're just gonna make a Starving Venom using the Super Poly, and then during our turn we will make the Dragostapelia. And here is one of the biggest weaknesses of this deck that I mentioned in the deck breakdown, which is this deck has a real big problem against a back row deck, which our opponent is in fact playing. So really typical combo of Dark Magic Circle plus a Navigation is enough to just win the game on its own. We didn't draw Cosmic Cyclone, so we were just gonna scoop it up. Okay, in game 2, we're once again going first. Now let's see what this deck is actually capable of doing if our opponent isn't on a lot of annoying back row. We did draw the 1-card combo, so let's go and pop off. We're going to reveal 2 Predaplant cards from my hand, add the Predator Practice, and then add the Poly. Go to Predator Practice, summon the level 1, and then go and special summon the Office Scorpio, and then special summon a Darlington Tonia Cobra from our deck, searching ourselves a Super Poly to fuse away our opponent's monsters during their turn. We're gonna go grab ourselves the Quick Play spell, attribute to level 1 to get an extra search. We're gonna grab the Equip spell for next turn. Our opponent is going to attempt to remove some of our back row, and they pop one of our Quick Plays, which means we have a bit less negates, but that should still be fine. And because of that, we can't really place counters on our opponent's stuff and then use their stuff as material. And because they're playing Literalisk, we can't really just use their monsters as fusion materials if they don't have a Predator counter because they are not dark. That's why we need both the Clammy and Quick Play spell to make it so that we can fuse away any opponent's monsters as material and not only the dark ones. But now it's gone, we'll just fusion summon using our own monsters instead. We're just gonna try to make the Dragon Stapelia before he is able to activate a annoying monster effect. He's gonna banish our Kaiju, which is fine, I guess. We're gonna negate his monster when he tries to get rid of it, so that we can have the Cosmic Cyclone ready when our opponent activates the Continuous spell. We're gonna do that, banish the Continuous spell. We're gonna stop him from being able to grab a bunch of material, and then he can't OTK, so he's going to scoop. Okay, let's have a look at the third and final game. We're going second with the expensive version, and in this game, you'll be able to see just how good this deck is at breaking through boards, especially those with a lot of monsters. And the thing about the meta currently is that we're trending towards more monster combo heavy decks, stuff like Borrowlink, Lyralisk, and even less meta picks like Dark Lords are still a lot of monsters on the field that they're going to end on. And our deck is really good at dealing with any type of monster, just because even if it's a monster that we can't target or destroy, we can just use a skill to put a counter on their guy and then tribute over it using our in-R-type searchable Kaiju. Our opponent will be having one single trap, which is going to be the negate, but that's not that big of a deal. Our opponent also gives us a monster, which is a bit annoying because we cannot control a monster to use the skills effect to place a counter. So instead, we're just going to use a Quick Play spell to put the counters instead. And now that all of our opponent's monsters are level 1, we can start comboing and attempt to use the level 2 Clammy to fuse away our opponent's monsters. So our opponent in response will negate our monster. That's fine, we can still fusion summon using it. And the Dark Lord that they gave us because it is in fact dark. We're going to make the Rafflesia, and it is able to banish a monster with a lower level than itself, but because we place a counter, any monster has a lower level than it. Our opponent will blow up the board using the fusion, which is perfect because now we can finally use the skill to place a counter on his untargetable guy, by the way. The skill can still place counters on things that cannot be targeted, which is really strong. We're gonna use the Ultra Poly to make a level 5 fusion, grabbing back the Quick Play for next turn. If there is a next turn, spoiler alert, there won't be. We're gonna grab the Kaiju just because we can, just to get it into rotation. We're gonna make a Starving Venom, gain a billion attack, and then after that we're gonna Super Poly away our opponent's monster. We're gonna make a Dragon Stapelia. Our opponent decides he has seen enough and is going to scoop before we can go in for a massive amount of damage.